Okay, have we started? I think we have started. Excuse me. It's very early here, so I'm still coughing. My hair's still a little bit messy, but I'm pleased to say that here in my town, it is a gorgeous day today. Lovely blue sky. The garden looks amazing. So I hope everything is as sunny as it is here where you are. So we're going to do something that I have never done before, and I must admit it's something which I have only just learnt about. And so if anybody else has heard of this distinction between gerunds and verbal nouns, it'd be quite interesting for me. Do tell me in the comments. Today I've put the comments up on the screen, so you should be able to see if anyone bothers to make any comments. But we'll have comments there, so if you do have any questions about this, then please ask. So recently I've been doing a lot of marking, and I've marked a lot of students' essays, and very often there seems to be a confusion between a gerund form. This was why, for example, in one essay we had disappearance, but I changed it to we had disappearing, but I changed it to disappearance. Okay, so there is a difference here. Sometimes a word will have, make sure we get this all down, a word will have two noun forms, yeah? A little bit like advertising and advertisement, yeah? Quite often a word will have two noun forms, and so which noun do we choose? And it's not only this that the reason which is the reason why this is important. I'm hoping to show you that this is very important for articles. Yeah, all you TEFL students out there that have problems, well, who doesn't, with articles, this will help you with your articles, and it will also stop you confusing disappearance, disappearing, survival, surviving. We had consuming and consumption. We had expelling and expulsion. We had mistakes between these two words in several of the essays that I was marking. And the mistakes were made by Brazilians, Italians, Russians, people all over the world make this same mistake. And that's why this is important. Now, I've only found one page on the internet so far about this. And this page, I'm obviously very pleased with this page. It's right here. It's the one you can see now. So it's on a website called Pedia, difference between gerund and verbal noun. And I want to warn everybody right from the start that most websites call gerunds verbal nouns. Yeah, this is typical in grammar. Very often you'll see one website using a word in one way. Yeah, they'll be using the word phrase in one particular way, whereas another website will call it a clause, a non-finite clause. So there's a lot of contradiction online about grammatical terms, about what grammatical terms mean. But I like how this website makes this distinction between gerunds and verbal nouns, because it will help you not make this mistake in your essays. And I can see that all nationalities make this mistake, and it's because, as far as I can see, I haven't seen this in any advanced grammar book ever. Yeah, I haven't seen this particular grammar point explained, but it's important. So have a look at this table on this page. And by the way, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Yigit Khan, and good morning, Humpty Dumpty. Good morning, Gulzada. Good morning, Sam, and good morning, Indrajit. So let's think about some Latin words, because I want to show you that sometimes you have I think this is particularly important with Latin verbs and noun forms like separate, separation, reduce, reduction, interrupt, interruption. There are loads of them, yeah? So with these words, you can make them gerunds, yeah? Interrupting, separating, reducing. There's plenty of other ones, expelling, repelling, or you can make them into nouns with an ending, yeah, with a suffix, I should say, yeah, with a particular suffix, like repulsion, expulsion, interruption, separation. Yeah, so which one do we use is the big question. And this was the problem with the students' essays. I could quickly show you, just to remind you, some of the mistakes that we had. And I think you will quickly see that these mistakes are all down to a confusion between the gerund and the verbal noun. So what mistakes did we have? Let me try and share them on the screen, perhaps. Can everybody see the video clearly? Lolly, can you see it clearly? I know you're back here every day, so let me know if the picture is clear. But we had the following mistakes. We had, and let me see if I can just pull these up and put them on the board for you. So we had the disappearing of green areas, and it should have been the disappearance, yeah? So we had the disappearing. Now, all of these sentences that I'm going to write are mistakes, but I want to just show you the kind of mistakes that will occur if you don't know this grammar. Yeah, so we had the disappearing of green areas. Not sure why, but my chat has suddenly stopped working and I have to log in again. That's not very good right in the middle of the stream. So can you see it clearly, guys, or is it bad? It is okay. Yes, it's pretty clear. Okay, well, that will do for me. I'm afraid my chat, though, let me just quickly see if I can get back in. Sorry, guys, technical problems. I'm not sure why. It's never happened to me before, but I have gone out of the chat, and obviously I don't want to go out of the chat if I'm watching you. But yeah, we had the disappearing of green areas, and that was wrong. It should have been the disappearance. Yeah. Now, why is that? Well, let's have a look. When you've got two noun forms, the gerund and let's call it the verbal noun, although I'm well aware that many websites call gerunds verbal nouns, but we're going to separate them. We're going to treat them as different entities. Thanks very much, Nadeem. Can you see the screen? Is it all good? So we're going to treat them as different entities, and I'm going to use this particular website to show you what the difference is, because it's a lovely table. It's very, very clear. So what's the difference? Well, gerunds end in ing, and verbal nouns, this is the really confusing part, sometimes end in ing. Yeah, we can't just say that gerunds end in ing and verbal nouns have a different ending. Very often they do, like disappearance, disappearing, survival, surviving. And so very often they do have a different suffix, but not always. And I'll show you a few examples in a second of some verbal nouns that end in ing, okay? But I want you at the moment to separate them in your mind, because gerunds can take an object, and in that sense, they're more like a verb, okay? That's really important. The ing form can take an object, yeah? And so if you take a word like interrupting and its counterpart, the verbal noun, interruption, you need to use interrupting if you want to give that word an object and still make it the subject of the sentence or the object of the sentence. So let me give you an example. If you want to say something like this, interrupting others won't get you any friends. Yeah, let me just write that down. Interrupting others won't get you any friends. It won't make you any friends. Now, you should be able to see that you can't say interruption others. You can't, because you can't give verbal nouns an object. Yeah, you can't give survival an object. You can't give disappearance an object. You can't give expulsion an object, but you can give repelling, expelling, surviving, interrupting. You can give these gerunds an object. Yeah, so that's really important. Anytime you want to give it an object, you need to use the gerund. Now let's look at something about the word interruption. What's special about the word interruption? How is interruption functioning differently than interrupting? So gerunds take an object, interrupting can take an object. So if you want to give that word an object, you have to use the gerund. Whereas the verbal noun, interruption, disappearance, survival, separation, communication, the verbal noun can't take, can be modified by determiners, the, and adjectives, whereas gerunds can't. Now that's really important. The number of times I have seen the following mistake: the reducing, the expelling, the compelling, the consuming. It's always wrong. Yeah, it's always wrong, because you can't put articles before a gerund. You can only put articles and adjectives before verbal nouns. And that's because verbal nouns really are things. A second point is you can make a verbal noun plural. You cannot make a gerund plural. So you should be able to see here that verbal nouns are far more like nouns, whereas gerunds take objects, so they have verbal characteristics, let's say, because they're still not verbs, but they have verbal characteristics because they can take an object. Okay, I hope all of this is clear, and I hope you can see where I'm leading you all with this, because what I'm trying to explain is that if you've got a word like, they're usually the Latin words like reduce, reduction, yeah. Reduce, the verb to reduce, you could say reduction as a noun, or you could use the gerund reducing, yeah. And how do you choose? Well, it all depends what you want to say. If you want to give reducing an object, then you need the gerund reducing. So, for example, reducing our prices will lead to catastrophe. You need reducing there, yeah. But if you want to modify the noun, then you need reduction. You need to say the reduction. You can't say the reducing. You must say the reduction in prices has caused a catastrophe. Yeah, the reduction in prices. So there's something to learn from this. Firstly, know the with the gerund form. Yeah, know the with the gerund form. That's very important. Whereas you can use the and adjectives as soon as you're using the verbal noun. So the survival and not the surviving. Yeah, the disappearance and not the disappearing. That was one of the mistakes that the student made. And that you can see now why it's wrong. You can't say the disappearing of green areas. You've got to say the disappearance because you've got a the. Yeah, and if you've got a the can only go with the verbal noun. So you can see that it's very important to know which words have these verbal nouns and gerunds. And I'm telling you now that it is the Latin ones very often. And please remember some important points here, that verbal nouns may look exactly the same as the verb. For example, increase. Yeah, the verbal noun is an increase. Yeah, they don't have to have a suffix, and the suffix could even be ing, but they don't have to have a suffix. So an increase is a verbal noun. Increasing is a gerund. But everything we have just said applies for an increase and increasing. Yeah, if you're going to give if you want to give the increase an object, you need increasing, and if you're going to modify that increase with any kind of nouns or with any kind of determiners or adjectives, then you need to use increase. Yeah, so this is important. You need to separate verbal nouns and gerunds in your head, and it will help avoid making some of the mistakes that we have already seen in some of these essays. Yeah. So let me just give you a few more examples of this. Perhaps we've done reduce and reducing. We've done interrupting, interruption. Perhaps somebody else out there can give an example of a gerund and its counterpart verbal noun being used correctly in a sentence. I'll be very impressed, and it will help me see that people can understand what the hell I'm talking about. Because this is something that's new for me. I only learned about it last night at about 2 a.m. And immediately I could see that this was valuable, that this is explaining how words function. And it's certainly the key to understanding a very common mistake. Yeah, this is a very common mistake. And I've had several students ask me throughout the past week, what the hell is the difference? You know, why should I sometimes use reducing and sometimes use reduction? Well, here is the answer. Yeah, if you want to modify it with determiners or adjectives, you need reduction. And quite often you want to be really specific about saying about something like the reduction in prices or, something like that. The separation of, the separation of ionic compounds, ionic salts, something like that. That you can, so remember, with all of these words, you can do it like that or do it with the gerund. You could say the separation of ionic salts or separating ionic salts, but with no the, yeah? And the same with all the others, reducing prices or a reduction in prices, yeah? So there's both options, but don't use the with the gerund form. Now, I want to make it clear that some verbal nouns look like gerunds and have an ing ending. So that's what makes this really confusing. And obviously we've also got participles, Don't get any of this muddled up with participles. If the word is functioning as an adjective, it's a participle and it's got nothing to do with this, even though participles look exactly the same as gerunds. Yeah, so don't get this grammar muddled up with participles. But let me give you some examples of ing words that are not gerunds. So, for example, reading, writing, singing. Yeah, when you think about it, these words you can say the reading, the writing, the singing. And what that's telling you is that these are not gerunds, they are verbal nouns. Now, I'm pleased to say that most of the ones that I can think of, they're ones that you already know, like singing, reading, writing. I think most students know you can say the wonderful writing on the blackboard was the beautiful writing, yeah, on the blackboard really impressed me, or was very, very clear, or something like that. Yeah, there we're using writing as a verbal noun and not as a gerund, even though it's ending in ing. Now, notice you can see that these guys are definitely verbal nouns because you can even make them plural. You can say there have been several readings of this paper or of this journal or something like that. It is possible. And there were many writings on the wall. It is possible. And so that's showing you that these guys are verbal nouns, but there aren't many of them. And even in fact, singings doesn't work. So they can't always be made plural, but you can say the wonderful singing, yeah, in the hall was admired by everybody or was appreciated by everybody. And so some are verbal nouns, even though they end in ing. But most of the time, with those Latin words like reduce, reduction, increase, increasing, yeah, all of these words, most of the time you're looking for the verbal noun when you're modifying it with a the or an adjective, and you need the gerund when you give it an object. Now, I think that's really important. The thinking, okay, I'm glad somebody's looking for some verbal nouns, and somebody else has put a comment about finding. Okay, let's have a look at it. Thinking, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to ask me questions about this because I'm quite excited about it. It's a new piece of information for me. So the thinking, can we put a the before thinking? The thinking, you can sometimes, although it doesn't sound particularly formal, I would argue that, but you could say the thinking in our company is that, meaning the general idea, the perception. Yeah, you do sometimes see it being used as a verbal noun. And you can certainly say good thinking, which is yeah, a verbal noun. Yeah, there is some good thinking in this department or something like that. Yeah, that would be using thinking as a verbal noun. But of course, most of the time when you want a noun from the verb think, you need the word thought. Yeah, most of the time, if you're thinking about something countable, you need thought. Yeah, I had a thought that, certainly, and not I had a thinking that, no, never. So do be aware that thought is the word you want most of the time there. So good question, is thinking a verbal noun? So the new findings, yeah, finding is a verbal noun there. Exactly, very good example. Ye git come. Very good example. That's exactly what I wanted. Something like that. You can see that findings can be made plural. And so findings is a verbal noun, even though it looks like a gerund. Yeah. The interesting finding in the report, you can certainly use it like that. Yes. You know, with some words, like, for example, advertising and advertisement. You know, advertising, it might look like a gerund, but actually, really, it's a verbal noun because you can modify advertising and say outdoor advertising. Yeah, it's very effective. So advertising is a verbal noun and not a gerund. So it's another good one to bear in mind as an example of one which looks like a gerund, but actually it's a verbal noun. And that's why that word, I shouldn't use that as an example. That's kind of an exception in the sense that the word that looks like a gerund there, it's a verbal noun. Advertising is a verbal noun and you can describe it. And that's how we know it's a verbal noun. Good looking is an adjective. And so it's not got anything to do with gerunds or verbal nouns. Yeah. Maybe you're getting confused with when you use an adjective to mean a group. Yeah. The rich, the poor, the unemployed. We don't often say the good looking. Maybe it's possible to do it with any adjective. Yeah, the rich, the poor, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's possible to do it with any adjective, but that's an adjective. It's not a verbal noun or a gerund. Yeah. So any more questions about this topic? If there aren't, I'll leave it at that. And I made this really to answer Zhenya's question. I have a student whose name is Zhenya, and he asked specifically about this. And I think that this page has the answer. Okay, so thanks everybody for watching. We'll stop there for this morning, but I will be making some more lessons soon. Please come and join me. I'm here most mornings, but only on my website, Skype